David, I would say that the biggest story going is this hacking of the election. We heard about it for basically the entire time Donald Trump has been president, but that was a story with no evidence about Russia hacking. Now we've got a story where there's a tremendous amount of evidence of Dominion citizens hacking, and yet it's not being properly addressed. How are you, David?
I'm very well, Jason. I'm tense because you know that I'm technophobic, but we got it through to you, so let's fire away.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of people out there who know they've been monitoring us for some time, several years. They have some good insights into where our various strengths and weaknesses lie. And I'll tell you, David, the most persistent thing about these social engineering campaigns seems to be their ongoing effort to tailor and customize the things that they're doing to try and jam us up. They seem very persistent at focusing them on each of us.
Well, and that's where this term, I don't see on my screen, you know, the opening sort of collage, but that's where
Give me a second, David. It's, you know, there's...
Sorry, I'm not. It's not a criticism. It's just, you know, I'm going to refer to the term of the title, which talks about these compromised nodes.
Right.
And specifically, I mean, just to give people in who are not familiar with this, a man called Cameron Ortis wrote a thesis about compromised nodes and cybersecurity in East Asia. And this man was doing a PhD at UBC, which I think is the epicenter for alumni, mostly unwitting, but a few witting, on the creation of a global compromised node network through which people get entrapped in pedophile rings, international pedophile rings. So on your collage, you've got some very interesting characters that are highly relevant to this, which I believe by the end of this show, we can demonstrate has managed to hack into the Dominion voting machines. And specifically, if I may, I'll give you the title of what I believe they hacked into. It's an outfit or a system called, or for, electronic correction of voter marked paper ballots.
So hang on a second, you're getting ahead of me, because what happens is when we have these kind of delayed starts, I need a moment to get everything together. So we've got the collage, and people can see that, but we're going to be talking about Dominion voting, the Delian Project, the hacking of the US election, and patents that are held by Dominion voting systems that are sort of furthering our belief that this is how it was done. And it's important for people to understand, David, every time somebody comes on this show, regular guests, you know, you've sort of got a line of research that you're doing that you and I sometimes don't speak for several days. You're doing research. I'm putting together all the different research from everybody who comes on the show. And we sometimes have these kind of like competing discussions. They're working together, but you've sort of got a list of things that you want to get out to people. And I want to make sure that we balance it because, yes, I absolutely agree. Cameron Ortis and all of the individuals we're going to be talking about today who are in one way or another connected to this Dominion voting, to Canada, to hacking, to this concept of compromised nodes. But I also want to talk, David, about the social engineers that seem to be perpetually trying to stymie our efforts. They themselves are compromised nodes. Before we get into the details of Cameron Ortis's PhD thesis, once again, if you could just take people through the notion of what is a compromised node, because I think I got a clearer understanding of it just yesterday when we were having a conversation about it.
Yeah, sure. And so the first time I heard of this term, compromised node, was in that thesis by Cameron Ortis. And he, as far as I know, I read elements or aspects of the thesis, particularly the abstract, but he doesn't define what a compromised node is. To a certain extent, we have to leave it to our imagination and knowledge. But a compromised node in a cyber system or cyber network, of course, would be some means by which you compromise a group of people through whatever means, such that when it comes to the time that you need them, they, in those famous words, listen and obey without
And
thought.
just really quickly, because when I was a kid and in grade school, they used to always yell at me when I would define a term using the term itself. So by compromised, if somebody is healthy, vital, able to exercise, lift a lot of weight, and carry out their job, they're good. But if their health is compromised, it's reduced, it's weakened. They can't work, they can't get out of bed, something's wrong. So if somebody is a solid, honest, on the up and up kind of person, and then they somehow become compromised, that can cover a broad range of things. What would you think would compromise a person, David?
Well, COVID-19 for a start. Now, so think about it, right? We're told that this coronavirus is running around the world infecting people who become compromised. What I'm saying is you dig a little deeper. Now, this is a conspiracy perhaps that J. Edgar Hoover would have meant or perhaps implied when he said the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he can't believe exists. I've tried this out on a few of my friends who are believe in COVID-19, and I'm saying, what happens if children with strong immune systems get infected either accidentally or maliciously and go out and meet their grandparents and infect their grandparents? Wouldn't that be a possible way of using a compromised node network of infected children to go out and infect the older generation? And
so what you're saying, if I understand correctly, we've got a healthy child, they go to school, everything is fine. If someone wanted to compromise those children, to make them a weapon of some kind, even if they don't know it, they could be infected with some sort of viral pathogen like
or vaccinated with a bad vaccine. Right?
And perhaps the child is okay, they don't know it, but they are now basically expelling viral particles. We've heard news stories said, I think the World Health Organization said South Sudan had a virus-induced polio outbreak. And perhaps all those children with polio have been compromised by some faulty vaccine.
Well, exactly. And this must be a concern to a guy up at UBC because he's written a paper or a chapter of a book. He's talking about data journalism, misinformation, and COVID-19. Right? Well, that means to say that he presumably believes, as I believe, that whilst there is a virus out there, its particular engineered aspects are such that it may be mild in children or young adults who have healthy immune systems, but exceedingly dangerous for people who are, older generation and who, for various reasons, have a compromised node system. And this is what I believe is happening. That is to say, the compromised node are a combination of entrapment through, some kind of sexual activity with a child, and a mixture of that together with the COVID-19 virus, which I accept as a virus.
Hang on, I'm sorry, David, because we're moving further away from what I would hope would be a clear explanation for people. We're dealing with a lot of confusing stuff, and perhaps we've conflated concepts by what I was trying to get to with my question to you is that someone can be compromised through a variety of means. One method is you make them sick with COVID-19, like Boris Johnson. Perhaps he's very fearful of contracting COVID-19 because we know he's had it. We know he was in the hospital. Trump has had it. If someone does have the ability to spread COVID-19 or some other virus, the concept of someone in their 70s, Boris Johnson or Donald Trump, getting it, they could be very frightened by that. And so perhaps they've been compromised in that they are now under orders to listen and obey. And perhaps we, the public, no longer understand what it is that person's going to do. We think Boris Johnson is the benevolent prime minister of the United Kingdom, and he's going to do things like do away with the BBC television tax. But in fact, he's been compromised by someone or something that is threatening him with the contraction of COVID-19, and now they can get him to do whatever they want, possibly. That's the hypothetical
you're
theory.
Right. And this last election, they've been injecting data relating to COVID infections into the news, right, into the various states and counties, such that the public has been led to believe that this isn't, and I'm not downplaying the seriousness, but I'm saying is the perception that has been created in the public mind through data journalism, actually emanating from the BBC, is that this is an incredibly serious infection, and Donald Trump wasn't taking it seriously. Both of those, in my book, are parallel narratives. I think Donald Trump took it as seriously as he believed it was appropriate. And remember, he's getting advice from a whole variety of people, including Dr. Fauci. Over to you.
Right. So, yeah, I think what sometimes happens is when we don't have a calm start, we're both sort of off to the races and possibly in two different directions. And I'm frequently going for a very impromptu style on the show, so we're not necessarily prepared in terms of having a script or anything like that for what we're going to say. So let me try and get us back in line here. So we're talking about a few different things. Basically, what we want to get to today is this notion that there's a Canadian company called Dominion Voting Systems that there is a lot of evidence to indicate had something to do with possible tampering, possible errors, possible hacking. They basically are controlling the voting machines in lots of states around the United States. And now allegations from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his legal team indicate that Dominion Voting Systems may have been involved in a plan to manipulate the results of the election. And in this collage, David, I've pictured Bill and Hillary Clinton up here at the top of the voting machine. Dominion Voting Systems has some sort of marketing program where they're promoting something called Dominion Secure. It's unclear exactly what that is because we've seen reports from the Texas Secretary of State and other IT professionals that have indicated numerous technical failures, possible exploits, non-secure aspects of this Dominion voting system. So when they talk about Dominion Secure, it's unclear exactly what that is. And David, as I look at the imagery related to Dominion Secure, this shield, the image on it, the very name, it's remarkably similar to Phantom Secure. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and just so people know what Phantom Secure was, it was an operation set up in Richmond, British Columbia, that provided a modified Blackberry service that was theoretically secure for all the essentially and exclusively criminal groups around the world who used it. And we're talking about 20,000 elite criminals around the world that were equipped with this Phantom Secure device in the belief that they could then communicate amongst themselves, human trafficking, drug dealing, and money laundering without fear of interception. But someone did break into it. Now, wouldn't it be interesting to know if the people who broke into it...
How do we know someone broke into it?
Well, basically, the FBI allegedly broke into it and realized who was communicating with who, and they alerted the Canadian Security and Intelligence Services to their belief that it was a man called Cameron Ortis who was actually providing these services to the phantom criminals. And ultimately, he's been arrested. But this guy was the head of the RCMP intelligence.
But was the allegation that he had broken the encryption or that he was just working with them?
He was working with them.
Right. I don't know that he's broken the encryption. I want to make sure we're clear on that. But Cameron Ortis, the allegation is that he's working with the criminals. And you and I over the weekend were talking, or during the week, we're talking about how it's an interesting possibility. I mean, we've always presumed, because he's on trial and in jail and everything, we've presumed that this guy is guilty. But then again, there's also the possibility that he was going to solve the crime, and so they stuck him in jail. That seems to be more often the case, David, that people who are appearing on the internet as whistleblowers or whatever seem to be lying to us, and people who go to jail and are framed as criminals might in fact be the honest people who were about to expose the criminals.
And I think you've nailed it. I think Julian Assange and Gareth Williams in the United Kingdom, who was found, his body was found rotting or decomposing in a hold all in a bath. He was a MI5 or MI6 agent working with GCHQ, and he had apparently hacked into Bill Clinton's diary. So he ends up dead, right? And that to me would be a typical example of someone that they've discovered as actually breaking into the secure network operated by the criminals or the traitors. And they have a variety of ways of neutralizing him. One is killing him. Another one, I would suggest, in the case of Cameron Ortis, is lock him up, have the RCMP, and basically throw away the key and delay the trial as long as possible. My allegation would be till after the election, when it won't matter.
Because there's information that could come out in that Cameron Ortis trial that might implicate some of the people that are, yeah, I mean, a lot of this is still unknown, but I want to point out some of these interesting factors that our viewers are going to be aware of and just pose some questions, because Phantom Secure, you know, they arrested the guy, what was the name? Victor Ramos. Is that his name?
Yeah. He's a Canadian. There are about 3 Canadians running this operation, 3 out of 5. 2 are American, but they haven't described how they've dismantled the 20,000 member criminal organization, which I would say, or I would describe as an online criminal insurgency. But right. What's interesting is, what is the relationship between Justin Trudeau and Cameron Ortis, right? They're both alumni of University of British Columbia. Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister of Canada, and it is alleged that he and a guy called Bob Paulson, the RCMP commissioner, fast-tracked Cameron Ortis into his position as the first civilian head of intelligence for the RCMP. Now, you basically got two alternative ways of exploring this. Is Cameron Ortis a good guy who's been taken out by the bad guys because he might expose this thing? Or has he become entrapped in a compromised node, of which he described in his PhD thesis, and basically they've taken him out because he's a bad guy? So I believe, my belief is that from an American point of view, one should suspect the arrest of Cameron Ortis as a way of covering up a compromised node network that has reached deep into your 2020 election campaign. Over to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about it because, you know, it's amazing to me that I spent so much time working with George Webb, and he was so focused on these Blackberries. They remain focused on the Blackberries, but they're talking about them in terms of being hacked by Imran Awan. Never once have I heard George Webb or anybody around him talk about this Canadian company, Phantom Secure. This is an article from last year. There was something going on in San Diego. I think that's where the FBI caught them. They were also in Las Vegas in a hotel being questioned by the FBI. We still have, there's almost more about this case that we don't know than we do know, but I don't think that this can be ignored. We also got a question, David, from our comments that I think you're going to like. It's scrolled off the screen already, but somebody was asking, what do they mean by Dominion? Would you care to address that?
Right. Well, that's very interesting. If we look at Dominion Voting, that's the name. And I think the company was founded around the 2003-2004 period. And it's a Canadian company headquartered in, I believe, Toronto. And so, of course, as you and I have discussed, sometimes you get these steganographic messages, don't you? Right? So numbers or names hidden in sort of plain view.
Yes. So
I checked out where Vancouver and British Columbia might have been creating compromised nodes. And there's 2 places. One is the Starnet communications operation at 425 Carroll Street. The other is the Picton Pig Farm out in Port Coquitlam, which sits in, wait for it, what is known as the Dominion Triangle.
Yeah.
Now, just think about that. I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, you've also told us that the Dominion citizens are part of the plan of Cecil Rhodes' 100-year plan to control the world by basically getting Dominion citizens from the British Empire Dominion, so the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, having those individuals participate in a British plan, a Cecil Rhodes-driven plan to take over the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So dominion would be a term applied to, for example, India, the British East India Company and the Indian Empire, from the which Kamala Harris's mother comes. So historically, she would have entered, I believe, or she would have been recognized in the United Kingdom as a citizen of the United Kingdom colonies. You could call her a Dominion citizen. Her father is actually from British Jamaica, right? And that's interesting. So her two parents would be historically described as citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, right? And they've come into the United States. They obviously have American citizenship, but their daughter was educated in Quebec. And all I'm saying is that would be a classic example, let's say, maybe euphemistically, of an attempt for a dominion takeover of the world, akin to the Cecil Rhodes Scholarship or the Cecil Rhodes Will, the 200-year plan. So I just think it's fantastic, extraordinarily interesting that Dominion voting might have got its name from the Dominion Triangle, where the Piggy Palace, celebrated is the wrong word, held raves where it would appear up to 100 women and children were dispatched out at the pig farm in the most disgraceful raves involving an audience of up to 1,700 people, with basically a crime that has been swept under the rug through, I believe, the operation of compromised nodes in the police force. Over to you.
Now, wait a minute, David. We've got some interesting information coming from Bob Katie. Piggy Palace is on Dominion Avenue in Port Coquitlam.
Correct. Now, there were two organizations that were created in 1996. Piggy Palace Good Time Society, which is a federally registered society licensed to hold sports and entertainment events, that turned into the scene for probably the greatest serial killing, allegedly attributed to one man, Willie Picton, but obviously run through an organization I would suggest of compromised nodes. And in that same year, in 1996, you have the Starnet Communications operation launched at 425 Carroll Street, which was raided. And we know that that basically was a massive generator of compromised nodes around the world, where anyone caught on the imagery that was generated by Starnet could be very easily forced into silence because they're terrified, without knowing the context, that they've got into some situation involving the torture and abuse of children.
So you're talking about another method that could be used to create compromised nodes. In other words, if somebody invites a politician to a rave at the pig farm, they might think it's just a regular party or a barbecue. But once you're there and you witness this murder or somehow involved with it or whatever, there's ways that they can entrap people. You said you spoke to someone whose family member admitted they would rather commit suicide than even talk about what was going on there. But before we go too much further into the Piggy Palace, I want to stay on the concept of Justin Trudeau as a compromised node. You and I have spoken quite a bit about the relationship between the Trudeau family and well-known socialist Fidel Castro. Communist, socialist, he's a revolutionary. But we've seen these photographs of the baby Castro, there you go, Freudian slip. Baby Justin hanging out with Castro. And this look on, her name is Margaret Trudeau, right?
Yeah, her maiden name is Margaret Sinclair, and she was the daughter of Jimmy Sinclair, who was a Liberal senator, and a graduate of UBC. Over to you.
But doesn't this picture, David, of baby Justin, Fidel, and Margaret, the look on her face is so motherly. Of course, that's her child, but the way Fidel Castro is holding him, I don't know. This picture definitely speaks 1,000 words to me. And just last night, I found many other pictures. It's strange to me that a guy who many people consider a tyrant, a dictator, a revolutionary militant, he loves this baby. I mean, this is just his friend's baby, according to the official story. But I feel very much like we've seen a number of photographs and a number of incidents throughout the course of history that reveal a much closer relationship between Fidel Castro and Justin Trudeau. They're looking directly into each other's eyes here at Pierre Trudeau's funeral. Fidel Castro was one of the only world leaders. I think Jimmy Carter was there as well. Justin Trudeau looks like he's holding back tears in this picture, where Castro is closer to him than an uncle might be. He's leaning in to say something quite meaningful, or perhaps he's just said it and it brings tears to Justin's eyes. Obviously, people have pointed out these pictures that show, visual similarities in the way these two men look at similar ages throughout time. What do you think about all this, David?
Well, so we have to go back to the narrative associated with the career of Pierre Trudeau, right? And there wasn't a dictator in the world that he didn't love, including Mao Zedong. And he had a career that takes him through, for example, the London School of Economics. And
Fabian socialists.
He's a Fabian socialist, right? And he's taken Canada down a path where the founders, a bit like in the United States, that's where the United States is heading if this doesn't get stopped prior to January. I believe the Trudeaus between them have helped to take the United States down the road or path of Fabian socialism, which just to summarize.
United States or Canada?
Well, no, I'm talking about the United States. The swearing in January is critical for me. I mean, this is my personal opinion. You enter a period of Fabian socialism in the United States if Biden and Kamala Harris come in as president and vice president. But let me just back up. What is Fabian socialism? Fabian socialism is essentially government by an elite, centralized credit, and depopulation. Well, isn't this COVID-19 look suspiciously to me like a depopulation maneuver?
Yes.
Right? That's breaking into the family, allegedly according to the BBC online news service, and that's where this term Trump in the title comes in, through the BBC online news service, which is using the Trump template, it's broadcasting daily statistics for the body counts in different countries. And you often bring up that moving chart that shows in January, the hotspot is in China, right? If you look at that graphic now and it's moving, and this is a classic example of manipulative data journalism that's designed to actually create fear and terror in the community or the target community, as it comes up to the present time, the one and only biggest offender in the world in terms of COVID outbreak and COVID deaths is the United States of America. And China is now the ultimate dog that is not barking. Well, this would be very much in the heart of Pierre Trudeau and I believe Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
If you just keep going, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I mean, along the lines of compromised nodes, we were looking at some of those images where Margaret Trudeau can't seem to keep her hands off of Castro. And certainly in the 1970s, I mean, it would be a scandal even today. But the notion that Fidel Castro might be the father of Justin Trudeau is a scandal that would, the Trudeau family would want to keep secret. So this has compromised them in that what would they be willing to do to keep that secret?
Or what would be they willing to do to avoid being hit with a hotspot of coronavirus? So again, there are two basic, I think we covered it a little sort of randomly. There are two kinds of compromised nodes in operation today, both of them that I believe track back to Justin Trudeau and his father. One is the compromised node associated with this coronavirus, where up at UBC, there's a guy who would specialize in data journalism and the kind of data that we're looking at right now. And this is sending a message that in January of this year, it starts out there. Look at China. China is the total focus, epicenter of the coronavirus. Now watch as along the bottom line, you've got the time axis and you're moving, well, 13th of April, etc. Just watch those bar charts. And they tell a story of this is compromised data journalism, where the journalists are not doing their job. They're parroting data that is being generated by artificial intelligence algorithms. And during the election period, this put the fear of God, if I may say that, into the American voter. And what they couldn't believe is the evidence coming out of the Trump election campaign that he thought it was a minor concern. But actually through his Twitter, I believe his Twitter accounts were hacked, right? So they played it brilliantly, the BBC and up at UBC.
Whose Twitter accounts were hacked?
I think the the guy in charge of the online re-election campaign for Donald Trump is a man called Brad Parscale.
Yeah,
Is that how you
Parscale.
pronounce it? Parscale. Now, look what happened to him during the year. I think, and this is pure my sense, he realized that the Twitter messages coming out of the online 2020 re-election campaign for Trump had been hacked. Right? I can't prove it, but it would be
Well,
very easy. Go ahead.
we don't need to speculate that they were hacked. We've got Twitter itself intervening. They've prevented the Hunter Biden New York Post story from going out. Anytime Donald Trump posts a tweet questioning the authenticity of the results, Twitter itself is putting a message on there that, sort of attenuates the president's message by saying this is in dispute. However, when they put up messages from Joe Biden, where he claims to be the president-elect, something that is legally in dispute, Twitter doesn't put any message there. So I don't think we need to speculate that they're being hacked. They just know that Twitter is manipulating it in favor of Joe Biden. Brad Parscale has been arrested.
Yes. So Brad Parscale, right? I think he's on the inside. Basically, I think the New York Times or the Washington Post credited the 2016 victory of Trump to Brad Parscale, right? So he's an expert in Twitter, Facebook, and developing a profile online. And presumably that was why he was attractive to Trump, who appointed him as the online director of the 2020 re-election campaign. But I'm just guessing here, and I know how Twitter and Facebook can basically demonize an individual or marginalize an individual or plant stories and generate a perception of, this is serious stuff, right?
But isn't that amazing, David? He's standing there calmly speaking to the police and they attack him. He didn't have a weapon. He wasn't being aggressive. But now we have this video where everybody who hates Trump can say, oh, his campaign manager was arrested.
Now, do you know when he resigned from that?
Days before that.
September 2020, right? He said he had to attend his personal health. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but it would appear that Brad Parscale was under immense pressure from what? My allegation would be from a compromised node. I mean, that's what they say they do. You get a compromised node or compromised nodes in Trump's election campaign that plants, right, or injects fake news through his Twitter account. So the public believes that Trump believes that the coronavirus is not serious. Meanwhile, the BBC, probably through this guy up at UBC, is pumping body counts, right? The most horrendously misleading body counts, where it says now or implies China is clear of the virus and the United States is the principal offender. And that was what drove perceptions during the election period.
Now, David, very quickly, back on Brad Parscale, because this is something that occurred to me while we were looking at that video. The video includes footage of what appears to be an extremely attractive woman who I think is his wife. The New York Post, there she is. And she's presented to us, in a bikini. Obviously, she's speaking to the cops. I mean, I don't know what's going on here exactly, but Brad Parscale cried during the arrest, told officers his wife won't have sex with him. So this is a guy who's having some serious personal problems with his wife. Is basically mocking him to put it in the news right here. Who knows what goes on between a man and his wife? Someone who's viewing the show right now asked, why was Brad Parscale arrested? I'm not really entirely sure. It looks like they were probably enjoying their pool or something, and the cops just came over, and while he's talking to them, why did they need to tackle him like that and jump on him? I mean, you could easily be injured hitting the sidewalk. They've got guns and everything. Couldn't they have just asked him to get in the car and quietly put some handcuffs on him? It's a very strange thing. But the question I have, David, because I'm also trying to process some of the messages people are putting in here. They're saying that Margaret Trudeau was Pierre Trudeau's beard. We know that that's a term that people use when someone in politics or the professional world wants to hide the possibility that they might be homosexual by pretending to marry a woman. That does seem to be a recurring theme that we see. To what extent, David, do you think that Margaret Trudeau might have been sent to compromise Pierre Trudeau? Because as the man's wife, she could certainly do a number of public things that would embarrass him, upset him? I mean, right there, we see Brad Parscale saying something that should be the personal business between a man and his wife has now become a headline in the New York Post. He's compromised by that, isn't he?
Well, totally. So I believe what British intelligence has developed is a superb skill at creating compromised nodes for leaders of, let's say, dominions who might need to be influenced at some later date into abdicating the sovereignty of the state. So let's say you might look in New York at what was the relationship between Ghislaine Maxwell and Bill Clinton, right? Did they not, or did she not create compromised nodes in which the elite of New York fell, ultimately to be manipulated and controlled right through to the point where Jeffrey Epstein is locked in a cell with a muscle-bound cop who's accused of 4 murders and suddenly ends up with a fractured hyoid bone and allegedly to have committed suicide. If you look in Chicago, who might be very effective at setting up compromised nodes? Well, what about Bernadine Dawn and possibly her protege, Barack Hussein Obama, right? And then in the United Kingdom, you've got Jimmy Savile, who's a great friend of past prime ministers, late prime ministers, including Edward Heath, who probably was a homosexual, and Margaret Thatcher. So the idea of a and that's where I think unerringly Cameron Otis put his finger on it. He was describing an existing structure, I think it was called Bowing to Quirinus, Compromised Nodes, and Cybersecurity in East Asia. I think by the time that he wrote that thesis, Vancouver and the Lower Mainland and Port Coquitlam had been taken over by a network of compromised nodes and transnational organized crime groups. And he was about to expose it. I mean, this is my theory, but I think it's far more credible with the speed and ferocity with which they moved on Cameron Otis, who's still behind bars. He was released on bail once and he was put back behind bars. They find 30 computers at his home that allegedly self-destruct if they didn't get the passwords right. I got a great load of sympathy with that because I keep getting my passwords wrong. Anyway, that's by the by. But wouldn't it be interesting if Cameron Otis was trying to expose what he wrote about in his thesis, compromised nodes and transnational organized crime groups in Vancouver, which I believe is the hub of this network that is now around the world 3 times before breakfast, and I believe was responsible for massive voting fraud in the 2020 presidential elections. Over to you.
Well, let's continue to explore that. So he's talking about cybersecurity in East Asia. You're talking about a transnational organized crime organization centered in Vancouver. Certainly, Dominion Voting, their principal guy over there is Jean-Pierre, well, one of them, sorry, I should say he is the principal with the Delian Project, which is a project, it's a commitment to action that's described by the Clinton Foundation, where the former head of elections for Canada, this guy Jean-Pierre Kingsley, he is one of the principals with the Delian Project, which is this not very clearly understood, sort of legally dubious, it's essentially just a press conference. We don't know what that Delian Project really is, but it's referenced by the Clinton Foundation and they say it has a value of $2.25 million. It seems to be, one of these things that they use to generate donations to the Clinton Foundation, which seem to go nowhere. Something interesting that I discovered yesterday, David, is that when I Googled this term Delian, there was a Delian League, which was a bunch of city-states brought together by Athens, where, the premise, the way they lured people in was they said, hey, we're going to kind of pool our resources. The Delian League was founded in 478 BC, and it was an association of Greek city-states, okay? And between 150 and 330. That's quite a range, isn't it? And there's our 33.
Yes, that's right. And I believe the way to capture a sovereign state is to capture city-state by city-state. And Pierre Trudeau understood that very well, that socialism should be spread through the provinces. Well, I believe the implication was through cities like Vancouver and Toronto, where you get the welfare police and so on engaged or compromised in some way to socialize the geopolitical entity, if you will, and then spread it out from the population centers, which is what I see happening in the United States, like in Chicago or San Francisco with Kamala Harris, or New York with Ghislaine Maxwell. So I think this notion of the compromise node is vitally important. But let me just
Wait,
go back.
Before we move off of this, it's important because what happened ultimately with this Delian society is that Athens got everybody involved and said, thanks for the money. We're going to do what we want. Screw all you guys. So they basically tricked everybody. Sounds a lot like the Clinton Foundation to me.
Well, and the compromise nodes associated with the Clinton Foundation. And there again, you have to ask yourself is, what is the Clinton Foundation doing, accelerating or enabling the spread of, I don't know, free vaccines in South Africa and Angola and so on? When you look back at what the Clintons did with that tainted blood scandal, right? I mean, this would be a very good way of vectoring some kind of infection like Hep C or AIDS into a target population, primarily through the prison, and then spreading it out and basically destroying the fabric of a society which very often doesn't have the resources to deal with like an Ebola situation or the pandemic that we're looking at nowadays. Over to you.
Something very interesting happening in the comments, David. So there's a lot of people that want to talk about the hammer and scorecard, which are a computer system and a software program associated with a guy named Dennis Montgomery. And someone's pointed out that Delian backwards is nailed. That is quite intriguing. I don't know that this is evidence that the story about the hammer is valid. I haven't seen any evidence that this hammer has been involved in hacking the election. We've seen reports now from multiple IT experts talking about specific failures with these Dominion voting systems. People are talking about exploit techniques where the word Republican can be typed into the computer system, replacing the lowercase l with a capital I. And what this sort of hack results in is that someone voting for Republican-Donald Trump, if Republican is spelled incorrectly, the vote is not properly tabulated by the machine. And so these sorts of things can be done to affect the vote. No one who is promoting this story that the hammer and scorecard were used have given us any kind of clear indication of how they were used. I hear people speaking in superlatives saying that Dennis Montgomery is the smartest hacker in America and that the hammer is a supercomputer that's so fast it can change votes before anybody knows it. These are grossly simplified explanations that really mean nothing. Someone is saying that Max Egan showed the hammer working in real time. Well, I happen to know that Max Egan is a liar and an underhanded guy who was making a lot of videos with George Webb's brother years before I ever met him. So I don't trust Max Egan. And showing it working, David, the thing that these social engineers like to do, it's very similar to what magicians do. Magicians use misdirection and they show you things while they hide other things in an effort to try to make you think that something is real when it's actually a trick. I don't trust Max Egan. I don't trust Amazing Polly. There was a huge dust-up with her this morning, and she is Canadian. Max Egan is Australian, I believe. These are all Dominion citizens. I mean, granted, I am as well. I'm American. So it's difficult, David. They seem to be actively working this stream right now to convince people that the hammer is a surveillance tool. That's fine. It may well be, but the hammer was something from 10 years ago. And what we have learned from our deep dive with Mike Zullo, Kevin Shipp, Sharon Rondeau, attempting to ask questions of Mary Fanning, Dave Janda, these were all people who were talking about this thing 2 years ago. The hammer is a 10-year-old blade server that was in Dennis Montgomery's garage. It's hardly a supercomputer. And people who are saying they know Max Egan and I'm wrong, I know Max Egan as well. I'm speaking from first-hand experience. I don't trust the guy at all. I think he's a social engineer and a liar.
Let me read, if I may, the abstract of this Dominion voting machine, which I think is a smoking gun, right? So
Yes.
the title is Electronic Correction of Voter Marked Paper Ballot, right? I mean, right there, the hairs on the back of my neck said, how dumb, and I shouldn't say that, how naive would American government officials be to have the United States Patent and Trademark Office run by Serco, which is also a major player in that child watch game, right? Watching abuse and abusers, all right, and tracking them.
Wait, it's called something else. It's called
child-based. It's called child-based is the project, right?
Now, wait a second. Give me the patent number here, because I think I have the wrong one on screen.
Okay, 8844813.
8844813.
Yeah. All right. Now I'll read it while you pull that up.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely vital because this isn't speculation. This is as described in the Patent Office, right? Yes. Electronic correction of voter marked paper ballot. Patent number 8844813. And in my square brackets, this has been processed by Serco's artificial intelligence algorithms, where Serco has been providing that service to the United States Patent and Trademark Office and the American public since 2006. Abstract. Methods, systems, and devices are described for electronically correcting votes made on voter-marked paper ballots. An optical scan system may image a paper ballot and allow vote modification by the voter following the imaging. Such a modification may be necessary, for example, if a voter has improperly voted, e.g. voted for two candidates for one office, if a definitive determination of the intention to cast a vote cannot be made, e.g. partially filled in bubble associated with a candidate, erasure and stray marks, close brackets, if a write-in candidate is included on the ballot, or if a voter has changed their mind or otherwise wishes to cast a different vote than initially indicated. After correction, the corrected ballot may be re-imaged, type, the application was filed in May the 21st, 2012. The date of patent granted is September the 30th, 2014. Assignee, Dominion Voting Systems, Inc., inventors, Lawrence Carb and James Hoover. And there you have it. You've actually got a compromised node network that I believe is controlling the injection of fake balloted signals into the Dominion machine throughout the United States during the 2020 election, and basically has been able electronically through artificial intelligence to dump votes to Biden and against Trump. And that is, I think, the key for the basis of an action against this 2020 election result for fraud. It comes through the extortion, blackmail, or some other compromise technique of the Dominion voting, the owners of the Dominion voting company. Over to you.
Yeah, and it's interesting to observe, David, we've got a ton of social engineers in the chat right now supporting people that I know are liars, supporting this lie that the hammer is somehow tied to this story. I say it's a lie because I've seen no evidence. What you're showing here in the patent, David, is evidence that helps us understand how this system could be used to do the things that Donald Trump has alleged have been done in this election. The reason I'm fighting against this hammer and scorecard thing is because the social engineers that are trying to convince the unwitting out there that the hammer and scorecard were somehow involved, they're trying to shove a poison pill down the throat of the president's valid legal challenge to this election. And should they succeed, what they're going to do is they're basically going to take a lot of good evidence and a good legal case and inject something false, fake, and easily disproven that would then be used to say, oh, you see, this whole entire election hacking thing was all fake news. I also want to point out, David, just before we transition over to our sponsor exclusive segment, which is going to start in 10 minutes, I want to point out that, President Trump, who obviously has access to a lot of evidence and I would presume is working closely with his own legal team. He's just tweeted 16 minutes ago, "It's heartwarming to see all the tremendous support out there, especially the organic rallies that are springing up all over the country, including a big one on Saturday in D.C. I may even try to stop by and say hello. This election was rigged from Dominion all the way up and down. I'm pleased to see that the president hasn't taken the poison bait of this stupid thing, the hammer and scorecard. I'm confident that Dennis Montgomery is not a reliable evidence. I'm confident that Mary Fanning has been lying about the hammer for years that I've known her. I first became aware of Mary Fanning through George Webb. So it's very interesting that people related to that guy all seem to be social engineers. And everyone is surprised to hear me say that I don't trust Amazing Polly. I think people have this idea that disinformation and agents of disinformation are giving you a certain percentage of true information and a certain percentage of false information. I would like people to consider the possibility that in a compromised node network, David, where perhaps all of the participants are compromised, some of them will be presented as truthful people who perhaps never, in the course of a large period of time, say anything other than true facts, some of which even seem quite shocking, but they keep those people waiting for a critical moment, perhaps like right now, where someone like Amazing Polly, who's become such a trusted entity, can deliver a piece of information to her large audience that, because she is so trusted, they'll just take it as true without checking it. Now, earlier this morning, when I asked Amazing Polly to just let me know what evidence she's seen that causes her to believe that this hammer story is anything other than false, she had a pretty violent reaction. She refused to present that information. You know, she and I got into a DM conversation that I've posted on Twitter that people can see. You might need to download the image to read it, but I'm just asking her to present evidence, and she's refusing to do that. I always find that strange. It's remarkably similar to this discussion I got into with the bishop. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm not trying to do anything. If she had evidence that proved what she was talking about, we could look at it. But David, I know I'm occupying a lot of time here. Can you give us just a 1-minute reaction before we transition over to Patreon and Subscribestar?
Yes. So Serco would have processed this electronic application for the correction of the voting, right, for Dominion, because it's been running the United States Patent Office since 2006. It's actually processed at 2006, and it's processed for me. Now, what's very important from the compromised node point of view, Serco is also providing input to the National Crime Agency in the United Kingdom and Imagist Technologies in Vancouver for that child-based operation, which is tracking abused children and their abusers through major pedophile busts, including Operation Ore, where, can you imagine, 7,000 people, names, Brits, were given by the FBI to the National Crime Agency in the UK. They were accused of downloading child pornography. In a significant number, their credit cards had been stolen, and 33 of them committed suicide. So Serco and Imagist Technologies and Vancouver is, for me, the epicenter of voter fraud in the 2020 election, and the tracking of compromised people by virtue of them having an alleged association with international pedophile rings of the type run by Justin Trudeau's roommate. Over to you.
We'll be talking about that more in just a couple of minutes on Patreon and Subscribestar, David. So I look forward to everybody joining us over there. And I want to thank the viewer sponsors who make this show possible. We'll see everybody in less than 5 minutes. Thanks for watching.